Okay.
You're on.
Okay. So I have a few questions here, which I actually got from some of it from your YouTube video. The first one's from Floating Wisdom, and Harsha Ray also had a similar question, and I do too. And we all want to know more about the relationship between Moon and Mercury. And can you describe the planetary friendship between these two planets? And why in some texts there's a bit of discrepancy. Sometimes they say Moon is the enemy of Mercury, and then sometimes they say Mercury is the enemy of the Moon. So we just wanted to know.
Yeah. So this is where the text is ambiguous. There's an article on my blog somewhere. I published it maybe 5 years ago. Couldn't give you a direct link to it or something, but maybe if you went to my blog, scroll down to the bottom and search. There's a search box down there. Search for planetary relationships or planetary friendships. You might find this, and I'll give the actual verse from the Parisa or Hora Shastra that is the source material for the friendships between the planets. But it's real ambiguous of when some of the relationships are mutual, like Saturn doesn't like the sun doesn't like the Saturn either. So there's no problem. There's no confusion there. But some of them are not mutual, like between Mercury and the Moon or Mercury and Jupiter. It's not a mutual relationship. They don't feel the same way about each other. Right? So it's hard or perhaps impossible to tell from the text itself which one feels which about who. So I feel now the way that people commonly interpret it, for example, with the specific case of Moon and Mercury, is that the Moon doesn't like Mercury, but Mercury likes the Moon. But I think that you have to, since the text itself is not clear, it indicates you have to rely on your knowledge of the nature of these planets, either the symbolic nature of the planets, or the way that symbolic nature has been codified into the mythology or describing these planets as people with their affairs, right? So if you know the mythology of Moon and Mercury, Mercury is the Moon's child, right? So it's not so often that a parent doesn't love their child or doesn't like their child. But it's quite often that the child doesn't like the parent, right? It's quite often. So that's one thing, just understanding the nature of the mythology that, well, Mercury is the child of the Moon. After all, the Moon signifies mothering too. It's not just any old parent. So it's not so likely that the very symbol of mothering would not like her child. That would be odd. And this, besides the mythology, if you think about the symbolism of the planets involved, Mercury is intellect and Moon is mind. The difference between mind and intellect is mind is the emotional evaluation of things as being desirable or undesirable, right? That's what the mind does. The mind evaluates a situation as being desirable or undesirable, and then it feels happy or sad based on that. Intellect sorts out what it is. God. So let's see if I have like a pinup on the wall. Well, what's that famous pinup model? Who is she? She's super famous. Huh?
Like from the 50s, you mean?
Yeah, from the 50s. What's her name?
The only person I can think of right now is Marilyn Monroe, but that wasn't the film.
That's not her, but Rita something? Anyway, let's use Marilyn Monroe. Let's say we have like a poster of Marilyn, a sexy poster of Marilyn Monroe pinned up on the wall of like the mechanic's garage. So the mechanic has in his mind Mercury and a Moon. Mercury is the one that looks at that pattern of light bouncing off the poster and recognizes that it's a woman, a beautiful, sexy woman named Marilyn Monroe. That's what Mercury does. It recognizes, what is this pattern? Moon, mind, is the one that says, hey, I love that. I like that pattern. Or some feminist who's tired of women being objectified for their body only will come in and see that poster and think, I hate that poster. Mm-hmm. So she'll have a different subjective reaction to the same Mercury, right? The same pattern. So the difference between Mercury and the Moon is that Mercury's intellect, which recognizes patterns. moon is the emotional mind, which reacts to the patterns. If you think about the way the two work together, you need Mercury to recognize that that's Marilyn Monroe before you can have any kind of emotional reaction to it. So the moon needs Mercury. It's not antithetical to Mercury. It's not antagonistic to Mercury. It likes Mercury. It needs Mercury. But when you try to go out, that's coming in, from the world into you. The poster comes into you. When you try to go out from your inner self to the world, when you try to express, you also have to go through the moon, from the moon through Mercury, and then out, usually through your mouth or through some gesture, through some words or some motion, right, to express yourself. So when you do that, the moon confuses your intellect. When you feel very objective about something and neutral to it, and you don't have a strong emotional preference that this is desirable or undesirable, then it's real easy to just cleanly and easily pick your words and speak. But when your objectivity on a subject is out of balance, then your intellect doesn't function properly in relation to it. You don't see it as it is. You can't express yourself clearly about it, etc. So that's why the moon it hampers Mercury. Emotions hamper the intellect, but the intellect doesn't hamper emotions. The intellect clarifies emotions and gives emotions the material that it's going to feel emotional about. So on that basis, even though traditionally people, like if you just go to a traditional astrological school in India, they're going to say that the moon doesn't like Mercury. But if you take my lessons, I'll tell you, no, the moon likes Mercury, but Mercury doesn't like the moon. Because I feel that you have to interpret that text in the context of the symbolism and the mythology. But it doesn't make that much difference, because then what do you use the friendships for? Primarily, you use them to assess the dignity of the planet. Like if you put Mercury into Cancer, how does it work? Is it exalted? Is it debilitated? Where is it in between that spectrum? So most traditional astrology schools and teachers would tell you that you need to evaluate the way that the host feels about the guest. That will tell you the dignity of the planet. But I would say you have to, that doesn't make sense either. The host is not even there in the house. It's the guest that's in the house, right? The host is not the house. The host is someplace else usually. So it's how the guest feels about the host. It's because you're talking about how that planet is going to be affected in its ability to carry out its agenda, as Ryan Kurzak always says, their agenda. So
when you say host somewhere else, you mean the Lord, right?
Yeah, the Lord. So let's say the Mercury is in Cancer. It doesn't matter too much how the moon feels towards Mercury, because we're talking about Mercury's dignity. How does Mercury feel about the moon? Because it's in Cancer. How does it like being in the moon spot? Being surrounded by the moon stuff? It's going to be determined by how Mercury feels about the moon. So I reverse them both. A traditional Jyotish will say Mercury doesn't like, what is it? So the moon doesn't like Mercury, but you have to figure out the dignity by figuring out how the host feels about the guest. But I say, no, it's the opposite way. The moon likes Mercury, but you have to figure out the dignity by figuring out how the guest feels about the host. So I've switched them both. It's like a double negative.
I see, okay.
So you get the same end result. You'll get the same calculation of dignity, whether you learn it my way or the traditional way. But I just think that the traditional way doesn't make much sense. And isn't as useful for understanding life. Like a nice thing about astrology, like I'm teaching in the level 1 course that we're doing right now, is you don't even have to read charts to benefit from astrology. It just organizes the world in such an amazingly useful way. Mm-hmm. So on that level, it's pretty important to recognize that actually, no, it's not the moon that doesn't like Mercury. The mind, the emotions need Mercury. They need intellect. But it's the intellect that gets confused by the emotions. These are supposed to be fast questions, right?
Yes. But it's explanations, putting it into context and giving it texture, so it's good.
Okay.
Can I extend this? I hope I don't, forgive me if I say this name wrong. Surab 93, they want to know, so it says, based on the last discussion that we had about Mercury and Moon, the question was posed, since Jupiter is the planet of knowledge and wisdom, what would be his involvement in this memory process? So again, related to
right.
Mercury and memory, so Jupiter's role in this.
Right, so we established that memory is in the moon. Mercury is the interface to that memory. I mean, yeah. It's not in the mind. Memory is not in the mind, but it's in a lower mind. English terms are hard to use with Sanskrit terms because we've come up with different words. In Sanskrit, we differentiate chitta from manas, but in English, we just refer to the whole thing as mind, heart. Heart is like chitta. So if we take heart as chitta, then we'll say memory is in the heart, the core of your being. And the Mercury is the interface in and out. And what's Jupiter? Jupiter is the stuff that you put in.
Yes. Okay.
What's Saturn? Saturn is the stuff you take out. Saturn is the garbage man.
Okay.
Jupiter is the grocery store. So you go to the grocery store, you buy milk, whatever else you buy, broccoli. You come home, you use it. That's all Jupiter taking stuff in to your mind. Good ideas, putting in ideas to your mind. Sometimes good, sometimes not good. And there's some junk that comes along with what comes in through Jupiter. So some of that junk, like the milk carton, the plastic bag that the broccoli came in, you got to get rid of that stuff from your house too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's what Saturn does. Saturn takes out the trash. Saturn is the one that says, you see all these ideas in your memory, all that shit is garbage.
Mm-hmm.
That's all, and Saturn loves to curse too. So he'll use all kinds of filthy words. And that shit is crap and blow. Get rid of that shit. So but that's so useful. He'll pull out all the junk that you don't want to have clogging up your mind and confusing you. That's Saturn's function. So a person with a good Saturn doesn't hold on to wrong ideas. Gets rid of them.
Okay.
And a person with a good Jupiter gets good ideas in. A person with a bad Jupiter gets confused ideas in, or unreliable ideas in. And a person with a bad Saturn can't let go of the bad ideas. Gets really attached to them, loves the garbage.
So then
Make sense?
all of the planets they're part of the process in this whole memory and minds.
Sure. That's everything that we're experiencing, right? The mind is the whole virtual reality character. In my grand, massive multiplayer online role-playing game of life, the mind is my character. The mind is the person that I am in that game. It's the seat of the person. It's the core, the foundation of the person I am is the mind. So everything's coming in and out through the mind. Body is a tool for that mind. Tool and an expression.
Yes. Okay. So I wanted to ask, actually I'll come back to this one. This question came from Uverman, and I also like to know, he actually made a comment about the role of nature versus nurture. And I wanted to extend on his comment and know how much of our destiny and disposition do you attribute to nature and how much of it is of nurture. And when we look at this paradigm, there's so many different variables. There's a multitude of variables at play. So how do we distinguish that when we're reading your charts and when we're looking at these conjunctions aspects?
As I see the nature-nurture dichotomy, it's the same dichotomy as the free will fate dichotomy.
Okay.
At least in the sense that if you think that they're two separated things, that especially if you think that they're antithetical things, then you won't solve the riddle. But like, for example, with fate, if you realize that it's the free will which sets the action in motion. And then having set that action in motion, it's got its momentum. It's going to create its result. So an action is going to create an effect. A cause creates an effect. So therefore there's destiny. Whenever you introduce a cause, the destiny comes out. The effect of the cause is the destiny, but you have introduced the cause by your choice. And then the cause, you continue to create new cause by how you react to the effects. That's the solution to the riddle with fate and free will. Apply the same thing to nurture nature. So with fate and free will, there's actually no fate. It's all free will. But the result of your free will is fate. Yeah, you decided that you were going to steal from the bank, so now you're in jail. Why did you decide you were going to steal from the bank? Because of some other cause that you did earlier on that produced an effect that made you, it's a very complicated chain. We can't dumb it down and simplify it, but it's a chain of cause and effects where cause must be ultimate by the very definition of what a cause is. So same thing with nature and nurture. There really is no nature. It's all nurture. But the nature is what's happened as a result of the nurture. Right? If you eat really good food, then you get a healthy body. And then you can say, well, my nature is healthy. Your nature is healthy because you nurtured it. And then, all of this, fate, free will, nature, nurture, it all relies on the reincarnation theory, which only makes sense. I mean, reincarnation is the only plausible theory because we can observe that energy never increases or decreases. It changes its state. So we don't expect that things are blinking in and out of existence. It makes no sense. It doesn't fit the model of the universe, that entities begin and end. It doesn't make any sense, even if you just look at physics, basic Newtonian physics. So, reincarnation is the only plausible way of looking at life, and all this theory of fate perpetuating into the next lifetimes, that fate and free will thing won't work if you don't accept reincarnation, because you say, well, this baby was born in a family of criminals, so of course he's going to rob the bank. He didn't choose that. There's no nurturing involved in that. That's his nature. But the reason why you're put into those situations is because of the previous choices and nurturing. So all the nature that we're born with in this life is because of the nurturing we received and developed and cultivated in previous lives. So I already forgot what the question was. Want to remind me of the question and see if I answered it?
So when you're looking at a birth chart, how much of someone's destiny, that thing that you're trying to interpret for them, is dependent on the nature aspect and how much of it on the nurture aspect of them?
Well, I would say when you look at a birth chart, you're looking 100% at nature. You're looking 100% at effect. You're looking at the karma phala, the fruit. So that's why, that's what you're looking at. So it's 100%. You're not looking at the nurture at all. The nurture is what kind of energy do you put in now? What kind of effort do you put in now to change? How are you going to nurture yourself? You don't see that. But the way that things work, because of that law, it's also like reflected in basic physics. It's like, what is it called? The law of where the things in motion stay in motion. Inertia, right? The law of inertia is like, if an object is moving at a certain angle at a certain speed, it stays moving at that certain angle at that certain speed unless some outside force acts on it, right? So from the karma, since people are and from the karma, you can see this person's been acting like this in previous lives. They're getting this fruit. They're going to keep acting in a similar way. It's predictable. The future is predictable. It doesn't mean it's set in stone at all. It just means it's predictable. Like if you throw a baseball at a window, the ball has not already hit the window. It hasn't happened. It's not set in stone. It's not predestined. But from the trajectory of the ball, the speed of the ball, that the ball's going to go through the window and it's going to crack the window. the weight of the ball, etc. If you know all the factors and you do the math and you calculate, you can predict the future, even though the future doesn't exist. You can still predict it. It's not set in stone, but it's predictable. Same way, by the karma pala at a person's birth, you can predict what they're going to act like in life and when the things are going to happen in life. Not because they've already happened and there's no way around it, but because you just know the trajectory, the angle, the speed, the momentum of things. And you can calculate ahead. But it doesn't mean you'll always be right. You can't always be right about the future. There may be an unexpected wind that blows the baseball. Or the person might suddenly close the shutters or something before the ball hits the window. Any number of things could happen. A bird could fly in the way, something that you didn't put into your calculation. Same way, when a person has karma pala, you can predict they're going to keep acting in this pattern, so probably their life is going to go down this road. But you don't know with 100% certainty. Because after all, not only could there be outside forces acting on them, but now with this law of inertia, we're talking about a conscious entity. We're talking about a ball that's selecting its direction. Not just a ball that's been hit by some other conscious entity. This ball itself is the conscious entity. It's rolling down a table in a certain direction. You can predict it's going to keep going that way, but that ball also has the ability to pick a new direction. Right? Like you driving in a car. If you're driving down the street 80 miles an hour and all of a sudden your exit is on the left, you can't, even though you choose, I want to go right there right now. Hopefully you're not going to go, right? Because it's going to be the end. Your car is going to flip over. But if you see the exit coming, a mile down the road, you start to slow down, you prepare yourself, you put on the brake, you gradually make your left turn, you can make your left turn. So it's not like we have unlimited, infinite will. We have our will, but the will generates momentum, just like driving down the road generates momentum. Doesn't mean that the driver doesn't have will, but they also have momentum as a result of stepping on the gas pedal, which was also their will. So the will generates momentum, and then that momentum limits your ability to express your will. But you always have the will. So it's pretty plausible to make a prediction about the future because you know a lot about the momentum, the direction, everything. And even if the person wants to change their direction, they can't make radical changes. They make changes gradually, slowly over time.
What about other variables that will come our way? For example, if I'm that ball of inertia, momentum, and you're one, and we meet, and I'm going right, you're trying to go left, but we intersect. So, yeah.
Yeah.
But
you can predict that, though, right?
You can predict that from a chart. Okay.
I'm not saying that I can predict that. I'm not saying that anybody alive can predict that, but I'm saying it's predictable, right? If you knew everything that there is to know. I think even Ptolemy says this in Tetrabiblios. He says, if you knew everything that you needed to know, you could predict everything. But human beings can't know everything, so our predictions are plausible, or we're getting closer to the prediction. We're getting in the ballpark, but we're not going to be exact. But anyway, theoretically, you should be able to say, well, here's this person's life and it's going this direction, and here's this other person's life and it's going this direction. They're going to meet at this point on this topic, and their force is going to, you can then calculate how, when two balls meet, you can calculate what's going to happen with the impact, the new direction that both of them are going to take. So you should be able to calculate that too, with how it's going to affect. Like if your idea intersects with my idea, they meet, then both of our ideas are going to change. So you can calculate that.
Okay.
Not
and
like
if you're going right and if I'm going left, we'll never end up hitting each other, actually.
Yeah.
Earlier I was like, if you go right, yeah. I understand. Okay. Should I go to the fourth one?
Yep. So what you're doing right now is you're going through all the YouTube comments?
Yes. There were good comments, and then I have some questions that are similar, so I thought, why not bring those to your attention? And
people are going to love you even more than they already do. They're going to be grateful. Uh-oh, blackout.
Blackout. Oh, is the internet working?
It's still working. You still have a light on. Let's keep going.
Let's keep going.
Everybody will know if the video suddenly ends, it's because Vancouver got a blackout.
It all looks so scary. Okay, that's okay. Okay, Ava M wants to know about theories of astrology, particularly the ones pertaining to Vedic and Eastern astrology. So she wants to know what you mean by theory of astrology, and can you recommend a starting point for her studies?
Theory of astrology is like, for example, the theory that the sun represents the soul. That's your, the theory the sun represents soul, moon represents mind, Mercury represents intellect. That's the theoretical basis. So you have to know your theory. You have to know the theory of astrology. What is the first house? What is the second house? What is the third house? Why? Why are those things? That's the astrological theory. What was the other part of the question?
And so she wanted to know if you can recommend a starting point for her studies, for example.
Oh, Vic DeCara teaches some really good courses on astrology. You know that guy, Vic DeCara?
Yes.
Yeah. Right now I'm doing a level 1 intensive course with a lot of people. So, and then I have a book called Radically Deep Fundamentals of Astrology. That's the fundamental theory. That's Amazonable.
Yeah.
I recommend that. Of course, I recommend my own stuff because I like it.
Yeah, no, but I recommend it because still till this day, the way you have the keywords laid out, even for my own work, just to get my imagination working, you just put those against each other and the mind just goes crazy. Those keywords help.
Great.
Looking at the graphs. Can I do one thing quickly? I'm going to just check the fuse box if it's possible.
All right, let me pause the video.
Okay.
We're recording again. That was great. See, your Mercury worked on that issue. You were matching patterns in your Mercury, even while Mercury can do many things at once too, because it's so balanced. Can juggle a lot of things. So even while you're listening to me, you have some space in your Mercury listening to me. The other space in your Mercury was matching patterns and saying, wait, it doesn't match the pattern of a blackout. The internet is still on. The lights behind me are on. It's just this room. There must be, this is not a match. I have to match it with some other pattern. And then the fuse box object came up against the one room dark. And you got a match. And then Mercury said, that's what it is. So that's great. Mercury is fantastic. One of our most important tools. Okay.
So I'm going to go to question 5. And this question is by Ashley. So she had a comment. It wasn't a question. So she was saying that figuring out your future through astrology is bullshit because you cannot apply logic to anything self-reflective, and narcissistic as wanting to know your future and your path. So I wanted to know how you define logic in general when it comes to astrology, because I think that'll be a pretty big component to understand first. And do you think when it comes to self-reflection and knowing thyself, should we use astrology more to analyze our past and where we come from, why we are the way that we are, or should we be predicting the future, do you think?
You're so kind. If it was me, I would just respond with another use of the word bullshit. It's like Saturn clashing up against Saturn. They just like attack each other. But yeah, you've dealt with this question kind of graciously. I would say, okay, what she says is it's astrology is bullshit because there's nothing as narcissistic as trying to understand yourself, right?
It's just saying that there's no logic to, you can't be logical when you're self-reflecting on yourself. There is no logic to that.
There's no logic to it? And she said it's narcissistic.
As wanting to know your future and your path in life.
So what is she actually saying? Can you digest it? Is she saying that it's narcissistic to want to know yourself and illogical to want to know yourself? Or is this logic thing have some other?
I'm guessing the whole self-reflective and not being able to apply logic is because it's so subjective and logic is supposed to be something objective.
Okay.
So use astrology in terms of self-reflexivity when it's so subjective. How can you know yourself? You're just playing with your own ideas about yourself. So it's hard to know oneself in that.
Okay. Okay, well, Ashley, my darling, I believe that you've misused the word narcissistic. Because Narcissus wasn't just a person who looked in the mirror. Narcissus was a person who couldn't stop looking in the mirror and admiring how beautiful he was. So self-reflection is not narcissistic unless you're sitting there thinking, God, look at me, I'm just so awesome. Look, you know, it's not that looking in the mirror might be practical. I want to see if I have a booger in my nose or not. You'd look in the mirror. Or I want to see if I have cancer on my face, right? Or, you know, all kinds of reasonable reasons to look in a mirror. It's not just narcissism. I want to see if I look good because some people are coming over and I want them to feel happy when they see me. That's also not narcissistic. So self-reflection is not inherently narcissistic. In fact, self-reflection is the purpose of life, since there ain't nothing in the universe that doesn't come to you except through you. Like the whole universe comes to you through you. Atmavan manyate jagat. The whole universe comes to you, through your mind. If you don't understand your mind, then you're not going to understand anything. And if you don't understand you, then nothing has any value. Because value is all in relation to yourself. In fact, the Upanishads say, there's nothing that we love that doesn't have some relationship to ourself. Everything has to be related to the self to have any value or importance or even existence in our universe. So, and knowing the self is extremely important. Otherwise, is it narcissistic? Know thyself. It's not narcissistic. So astrology, maybe some people are narcissists. They're just sitting there looking at their charts and glorifying themselves. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that astrology is inherently narcissistic. And now if it's logical or illogical, well, logic does not mean objectivity. Logic means system, right? Logic means that the words have a meaning, logos, that there's a meaning, and then you evaluate meanings in a systematic manner. So you'll say, bright things are hot, this thing is bright, therefore this thing is hot. That's a logic. It's not objective or subjective. It's not about objectivity or subjectivity. Logic is about process. That's why Saturn loves logic. Saturn's quite logical. Well, Saturn's also objective. But Saturn's quite logical because it likes process. It goes about things slowly and in a step-by-step manner. So that's one of the reasons why it's logical. Logic should also be objective because you need your givens to be accurate. If your givens are not accurate, then your conclusion is not reliable. So, for example, in that example I just gave you, hot things are bright, this thing is bright, therefore this thing is hot. That's not a reliable conclusion, because the LED lights are bright too, but they're not hot. So, or the moon is bright, but it's not hot. The sun is bright, but it's hot. The moon is bright, but it's not hot. So you have to be objective also to analyze your givens and say, is this accurate? So accuracy is important to logic. But it's not that because everything is subjective. The questioner is the questioner and questioning from the subjective viewpoint. The scientist is scientist. There's no such thing as objective. Everything is consciousness observing other conscious entities. Everything is subjective. That's why you can't separate the observer from the observation, and that's a real problem when the scientific experiments get down to real fine detail. So the only objective thing really is the master consciousness. The way there's a master consciousness that synchronizes all of us, all of the mini consciousnesses. The master consciousness, the way the master consciousness perceives reality is the closest thing to what's objective. The rest of us perceive that from our subjective viewpoints. So there's no necessity that there is impossible to be absolutely objective. Logic has to be subjective. But you better know that this logic is not perfect. Logic is getting you to a good conclusion. But your givens can't be perfect, so your conclusion can't be perfect. Right? So astrology is not bullshit. Sometimes astrology is bullshit, though. Just like some people might be narcissistic in how they're using astrology. Some astrology might be bullshit. Some astrologers might be bullshitters. Probably there's plenty of them, actually. It's probably rare to find an astrologer these days who's not a bullshitter. But Leonardo da Vinci was an astrologer. Copernicus was an astrologer. Kepler was an astrologer. I mean, all these people are. Who?
Newton. There's lots of
Newton.
books. Yes,
Yeah,
there's lots.
I mean, astrology is the basis of science. And it's just that after a while, they realized it's more reliable to explain things with actual direct causes than it is to, because they got derailed on the whole idea of causality coming from that astrology was causal. That's what derailed them. They started getting into this idea that the planets are actually causing stuff to happen on Earth. And that becomes irrational. And it leads you to just say, no, actually the stuff that's causing stuff on Earth is the stuff on Earth. This person died because they got this bacteria, not because Saturn moved into this other position. Right? So the sciences became more real because they were thinking Saturn moving into this position doesn't affect anything. It's right. One of my favorite episodes of Cosmos, where Carl Sagan says the effect of Saturn on the Earth is less, the effect of the light or whatever comes from Saturn and gravity is less than the effect of the light and gravity that you get from a candle that's at the end of the hallway, a very long hallway. So it's not, that's what derailed them. And it started with the Greeks, and Ptolemy was the first to really clearly express it. There's, I think others maybe before him, slightly before him, a century or two, started to express that mechanistic idea of astrology, causal mechanistic idea. But prior to that, it was called the sky script, the writing of the heavens, the language of the sky. It wasn't a causality, it was a message. It was a way of the universe helping convey information to you, but these things weren't creating events, they were just describing the nature of events. So then it seems like bullshit it became known as bullshit because they got derailed in their understanding of it. And then they realized, no, this is bunk. Saturn's not affecting the weather even. And if you read carefully the rationalizations of how Saturn could be causal, they're garbage. Logically garbage. Like the rationalization that even the ancient authors will give is like, well, see, the moon affects the tides and the sun affects the weather, so Saturn must have an effect too. No, but the moon is gigantic and super close to us, and Saturn is super far away and dim and has no real effect. Sorry, this analogy is not good. That's not good logic. But it doesn't mean that astrology is irrational. It's just that it evolved, especially in the West, into an irrational explanation of how it works. The rational explanation is that actually there's a consciousness at the root of reality, and the consciousness was helpful and wants to help people and gives information in so many ways about life, and astrology is one of those ways that it gives information about your life.
Mm-hmm. This is a good clarification, because when people are scared of certain planets too, as if it's affecting them and causing us certain things, you're saying right now, correct me if I'm wrong, that they're actually just showing us a pattern of your being. They're not putting their hand on your head and doing something to you.
They're just telling you. They're just information. It's just information. It's just the language. Why is Mercury the planet of astrology? Because it's the planet of languages, and astrology is one of the languages. The planets aren't affecting you. However, when you go into the symbology of things, mm-hmm. Symbolically speaking, like you say, an aspect, like let's say, what's an aspect? It's a drishti, one planet's looking at the other. It sounds like they're doing something. Yeah. In the symbolic, like if you have a picture of an upside down triangle, it's just an upside down triangle, but it represents femininity because of something that you ascribe into the symbol, some meaning you put in there. So similarly, you should put personality and personhood and interactivity into the symbols, because then you can visualize and understand how they interact. So we should say, this planet is looking at, Mars is looking at Jupiter, is aspecting Jupiter, or they're fighting a war. The planets have come too close together. They're fighting a war, things like that. It's not that it's literally this is what's happening, but it's almost essential in order for us to work with the symbolism that we give it some anthropomorphism. And it's also just like, it looks like from the symbolism looks like, oh, Mars in your 7th house in Aries is causing you to not really want relationships. That's how the symbolism looks. But in the real world, it's not causing anything. It's indicating to the astrologer to tell this person, hey, I think you probably don't really even want relationships enough. Okay, that makes sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you. Okay, so question number 6. Do we have time?
We do.
Okay?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So Letitia Matos, she thinks that having Saturn, Sun, and Ketu conjunction in the 4th house in Libra sucks.
I remember that comment.
Yes. And also Harsha Ray wants to know how to interpret Sun and Ketu. So I just wanted to see, because Ketu is one of those freaky planets, Freaky Friday. So I just wanted to know, how do you interpret especially Ketu and Sun?
Well, I can't even remember what her 4 things were, but maybe that does suck. I'm sure it does suck if she thinks it sucks. Right? I'm not sure it sucks, but maybe it sucks. Maybe it doesn't suck. I don't know. If it sucks or not depends a lot more on just the information that you gave me. And when you tell a person that, they give you more information. So like, for example, somebody will say, oh, I have, what was the Ketu conjunction that you mentioned?
Ketu, Saturn and Sun in the 4th house.
Okay, so let's start off with Ketu and Sun. Say I have Ketu and Sun together. What does it mean? And they'll say, I don't know. It could mean anything. Mm-hmm. Well, it can't mean anything, but there's a very large spectrum of things that it can mean, because Ketu is pulling in and pulling down, and Sun is shining and represents the self. So within that venue, there's a wide variety of things that you can interpret. So I can't say what it means, except that these are the symbols that you're dealing with. Well, what would you need to tell me more? Well, I would need to know more about your chart. Well, okay, it's also with Saturn. Okay, now I know a little bit more. I could tell you a little bit more now. Saturn has that energy of restricting things. It's a little depressing and negative. So your Sun is being exposed to Saturn and Ketu at the same time, which are kind of like pulling things down. Right? So that's the basic symbolism that you're working with. Does it mean that you're getting grounded and you're deeply spiritual and detached? Does it mean that you're getting depressed? I don't know, because you haven't told me enough about the chart. Mm-hmm. So then they'll tell you more. They'll say, well, it's in my 4th house. And then it gives you a little bit more. But people, you have to look at this whole chart before you can say this is what it means. And even when you do that, your astrologer is making their hypothesis, their interpretation. And the whole chart includes all the calculations, the subcharts, the nakshatras, the amshas. So just saying, like, I have these 4 planets together, does it suck? I think it sucks. Does it suck? You can never really say unless you got the whole picture in front of you.
But one could extract something positive from such a conjunction too, right? Depending on the charts.
Right.
It's not always doom and gloom.
Right. Like I said, you got Ketu and Saturn with the Sun. Maybe that means you're a super grounded person. You're super practical. Because of Saturn is really they're pulling down, right? The nature of the symbols of Ketu is pulling down, reducing. The nature of Saturn is reducing, pulling down. And then the Sun is this really sturdy figure. Right? The Sun is sturdy, reliable, dependable, strong. Maybe these 3 together can mean really sturdy, dependable, reliable, tenacious, down to earth, not with an inflated ego at all, humble. And you'll find, actually, you know what else is weird too? Exciting, actually, interesting, beautiful about astrology is practically everything that you could say about that combination would resonate with that person to some extent or another. They would get something. Everything about the possible combinations of the symbol is going to affect you. We just don't know to what extent, how prominently. So it might be something that you hardly even recognize. That's why people, even if you get a reading from somebody that doesn't know astrology too well, if you're really good at listening and you're really good at thinking, then you can still get great stuff out of what some amateur says, right? Because you're thinking about the symbols yourself, and it's going to make sense to you because, wow, that is me actually, you know. But the really good astrologer will be able to say, look, this is the definite thing about this combination. This is the most prominent, important thing that it means, undeniable thing that it means. And as for these other little things, yeah, those are little flavors, subtexts that are active in your life. You could access those more if you want to, or you could shy away from them more if you want to.
Thank you. Okay, and question number 7. Diana wants to know what's the deal with the relocation astrology, and do you believe once one moves and the ascendant changes by moving, life situations would change?
I think I have a video on that too, like dedicated to that topic. It's a very modern theory. Astrocartography is a very modern theory. The theory doesn't make sense to me. That like, because I'm changing my position on Earth, my birth chart changes? Doesn't make sense. My birth chart is a chart of my birth. But there's some logic to, if something does make sense about it. If I change my position on Earth, my relation to, it doesn't make that much sense. You know, my relation to something maybe changes. It doesn't make that much sense. I think people just love it because it's cool. You can get a picture of the world, put lines on it. It looks real scientific, and it looks like it easily conveys information. So it's people say, "Oh, yeah, follow this line here." As far as if it works or not in practical, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. If it's hit or miss, then it probably isn't a good theory, right? So I don't really put that much stock into astrocartography. If somebody wants me to do an astrocartography reading for them, I don't hate it. I'm not certain that it's a bogus idea. I'll do that. I'll do an astrocartography reading for somebody, but it's not something I go around advertising or promoting or saying, hey, this is great, everybody should do an astrocartography reading. I think it's simpler to say like, oh, you're like a predominantly Jupiter person. You should live in a place where you get good access to knowledge. It's better to assess your living point, your living conditions more flexibly than just by latitude and longitude, right? The latitude and longitude of Iran right now is the same latitude and longitude of Iran 5,000 years ago. But do you think Iran was the same place 5,000 years ago? It's a hugely different place, right? Or even the neighboring areas, tremendously different place. Same thing would go for any place in the world. So it's not just by latitude and longitude.
Yeah, moving here, whether if my ascendant changed or not, staying in Iran, it would have been a very different future and destiny then.
Yeah, so we should see that through your sun, for example, how you relate with governments, more than how the latitude and longitudes change. How do you relate with governments? How do you relate with this? You know, how do you relate with governments, for example, plane? Will you leave your homeland? How's your 4th house configured? Is it going into the 12th house? The 4th lord going into the 12th house? Is the 12th lord coming out and doing something big, like coming into the 10th? Then those are indications that you should move. I think there's better ways of looking at moving than to just rely on the astrocartography model.
That makes sense. Okay. I like that. Question number 8. Rachel wants to know, what Ayanamsha do you use? Why do you use this one, and when do you use the other ones?
I use the other ones when I want to try to see if I should use another Ayanamsha. Like when I want to experiment, then I check out the other ones. I use Lahiri Ayanamsha because it's the basic Ayanamsha. It's the first Ayanamsha I was ever introduced to. Lahiri is just like the standard Indian government accepted stamp of approval Ayanamsha. Ayanamsha means where is the beginning of the heavenly circle. That's what Ayanamsha means. Or that's how it's used. It's used to actually mark the difference between stars and the equinoxes. Ayanamsha means what is the difference between the equinoctial point and a stellar reference. Yeah, like they'll say, Why? That's why the Ayanamsha changes. You know, Ayanamsha is not static. The Lahiri Ayanamsha 2,000 years ago was 0. Roughly 2,000 years ago. Today it's 23 and something, 24 and something degrees. It's not static, it changes. Because the relationship between the equinoctial point and a star changes. So what you want to, that's what Ayanamsha is all about. So how do I measure the difference between the equinoctial point of Aries, 0 degree, the vernal equinox, northerly equinox, and a fixed star? Lahiri says, it's also called Chitra Paksha. It's named after Lahiri because that's the secretary of the committee that got it ratified for the Indian government. The actual technical name for it is Chitra Paksha, based on the star Chitra, which is Spica, which is in the thigh of the Virgin, Virgo, which is so ironic too because it's supposed to be the end of Virgo, but it's in her thigh. It's high up on her thigh. It's in a nice spot on the Virgin's thigh. So you can see there that, okay, these constellations are not the same as sidereal things, but that's another bowl of worms. So Lahiri Ayanamsha says that star over there, Spica, which is in the thigh of the constellation Virgo, is X degrees away from the vernal point. At this point in time. And then there's other Ayanamshas that say, no, that other star over there, Pushya, the star that's for the nakshatra Pushya, is Y amount of degrees away from the vernal point at this point in time. So there's different Ayanamshas that have a different opinion of how you correlate, how exactly, and on all of them are within like a degree, 2 degrees. They're very close. So basically there's no real difference. That's why I just use Lahiri, like who really cares? What's the difference of one degree, 2 degree? And people that are really into those fine details still say, what do you mean? What's the difference between 1 degree, 2 degree? But you know what? Man, this is an interpretive art. There's fuzzy areas like 1 degree, 2 degree. If your whole accuracy and your whole value of your reading is hinging on this 1 degree, 2 degree stuff, I probably don't want to get a reading there. I want something that's like pretty solid and reliable. It's not like, oh, but if it's 1 degree different, it's totally different. So I don't care if it's Pushya Paksha or Lahiri. For the 98% of what I do, it doesn't make a difference to me if the vernal point is 24.5 or 24.9 degrees away from this particular stellar reference. However, Ernst Willem has this radically different Ayanamsha. And by radically, I mean like several degrees different. Because he recognized that that stars are measured in reference to the north magnetic pole. The north pole, not the north magnetic pole, the north axial pole. Which is undeniably true. But then he has 2 versions of his Ayanamsha. One is where you map it to the ecliptic, and the other is where you map it to the equator. And he goes with the one where you map it to the equator. But I don't agree with that. If you map his Ayanamsha to the ecliptic, it's almost the same as everybody else's. It's in the same ballpark again. When you map it to the equator, because the equator and the ecliptic are at a divergence of 23 degrees. So you're going to measure the position of a star that's here on the ecliptic, but when you get to the equator, it's going to be significantly more progressed. So it makes a big difference. And there's no reason why you should map it to the equator because we're not measuring things on the equator. His reasoning is, well, it's perpendicular to the North Pole. But my reasoning is, I don't care about the equator. I'm not measuring things on the equator. I'm measuring things on the ecliptic. So I don't use his Ayanamsha. I just used the Lahiri because I never had to change anything else. I experimented with Pushya Paksha, and my experiments came out positive. Like that actually it was a little bit, this little 1 degree nudge did make things a little more accurate. But like I said, 98% of the stuff I do doesn't really matter. So I haven't taken the trouble like update, because I program all my calculations into computers and things. If I'm going to change Ayanamsha, I'm going to have to do a little bit of work. It's not just like changing a setting on a software program. I have to change my code and stuff. So it's not enough for me to want to change. And of course, I don't use Ayanamsha for the Rashis. I don't use any Ayanamsha for the Rashis. Because that's what the Ayanamsha is. It's a measurement of the difference between the equinoctial point, which is the basis of the Rashis, and the stars, which are the basis of the nakshatras. So to apply the Ayanamsha to a Rashi is counter to what the very Ayanamsha is. Make sense? You didn't get any time to do it. So many questions.
There was 10 of them.
It's because I talk really long.
No, it's good. We can keep it shorter, and then next time I can bring the other ones in.
Yeah,
but I do want rapid questions.
You want to do them now?
Whenever we're getting to the end.
It's like 1 hour now, so.
Should we go to the rapid questions?
Yeah, let's do the rapid questions.
Okay. I always wanted to do this to someone.
Okay, so I have to answer fast. Is that the rule?
Yeah.
I can't pontificate and explain anything. I just give you. What's my rule? Give me.
1 sentence max.
Oh my God.
Oh my God.
Okay, I'll try.
Capricorn ascendant, you can do it. First record ever bought.
First record I ever bought myself. Doesn't count the records I listened to that my mom owned or anything.
No, the one you went and invested on.
It was Rush 2112.
Okay. When was the last time you gave someone an Italian hug? I have to watch the last video to know what that is.
3 hours ago?
3 hours ago.
Wait, what's an Italian hug? You mean an argument?
Yeah, like the way we discussed in the last video.
The last time I gave somebody a so-called Italian hug. Maybe in this video, maybe I gave, what's her name? Ashley, an Italian hug.
Last work you translated.
Last work I've translated. I'm still translating it, the Taittiriya Brahmana Nakshatra Sutras.
Beautiful. The best and the latest observation you made around the house as a husband or as a father. That touched your heart.
That touched my heart?
Mm-hmm.
Observation around the house?
Mm-hmm.
That women do a ridiculous amount of work.
Very true. Last book you published?
That was, that was a Sedona-only version of the sequel to 27 Stars, 27 Gods, which is going to be called The Vedic Stars. Then I expected that I was just going to proofread, maybe edit a little bit more, and then release to everybody after Sedona. But while I was in Sedona, I got exposed to Taittiriya Brahmana Nakshatra Sutras. Now I'm translating those. So those are fantastic. And I'm going to make those actually like the centerpiece of the new book. So the new book has to wait until my translations are done. So the last book I published then was that Sedona edition, which is kind of cool. Now it's more of a collector's item because it'll be quite different than the published version.
What should we expect the next one?
Let me say optimistically,
yes.
Spring, beginning of spring, probably realistically end of spring.
Okay, a few months away. Rajipal and myself, we want to know, what do you think about becoming a lawyer if you get tired of astrology?
Only problem with lawyers is you have to pass a bar, you have to go to like all the school and all that stuff.
Right.
If there was a great like zombie apocalypse and I could just be a lawyer without certification, then I would love it.
But, okay. Got it. Last sugary item you ate or a food related example you give? Because ever since you started teaching me, you're giving food examples and talking about candy. So
nothing except food, donuts, ice cream. Last sugary item. Well, I had a bit of my daughter's chocolate. I got her some Valentine's chocolate, and then I had a little bit of it. It's cute. It has "I love you" on the front, but the heart is like the store's little mascot, which is some weird guy with a mustache, a big mustache.
That's cute.
Like a heart with a mustache. My daughter likes it.
That's sweet. What are you reading at this very moment? Not this very moment, but at this time.
It's awful, but I don't read. I don't read. Either study something like excruciatingly, or for entertainment reading, I don't do that. I'll go see a movie, play a game, or just talk to somebody. But I don't really do entertainment reading. It's not conducive with my lifestyle as a father of 3. And so I'm not really reading anything right now. I'm studying Taittiriya Brahmana, a bad translation of it, just to get my bearings straight on the overview of it. What else? That's it. I was actually planning, though, that I want to study again all the books that I've studied already, like Parashara Horashastra and Paladipika and Brihat Jataka. Because I think you should revise after, it's been maybe several years, maybe 6 or 7 years now. Maybe I think like every 5 years a person should restudy what they had studied before, because you get so much more out of it after you have more experience.
I agree. Sheila Jacqueline loves your intro music, and I want to know what's your top song right now that's on replay.
Again, like I had enough of rock music because I was a rock musician. So like I don't even listen to my favorite band. It's, my favorite band is the Bad Brains. I don't know the last time I listened to the Bad Brains. I just play kirtans like in my house on repeat. So I just have like kirtans going. It's not necessarily like I'm listening to them. They're just like in my house playing. Let's see. I'm doing a song with my English students. They're singing. I made the music for them. They have to sing. They practice their pronunciation.
That's beautiful.
Like I kind of like my relationship with music is more like I make music. And I know a lot of musicians that make music, they listen to a ton of music, but I don't know what it is. I just, like same thing with astrology. Like I don't do a tremendous amount of astrology for myself ever. I'm not like checking my transits and want to know what's happening. Like, why don't I know when my book is going to be published? I should know my transits, right? But I don't care. Same thing with the music. I do my astrology for other people. Music, I make it more than listen to it. I enjoy making music. I love listening to music too, but I don't get that much chance, like reading too.
It's a good way to remain original. Good lesson for.
Yeah. But I'll just say one thing too. I go in the car, my wife will put on whatever CD she's got in there.
Yeah.
It's her car, she drives, I don't drive. So so I'm at her behest of whatever she listens to. And you'd be surprised what I actually listen to, actually. Like, I don't mind pop music. I like pop music. It's stupid stuff. It's not so stupid, really. It's, like little songs about everyday life or stupid things. It's cool. I get meaning out of that. It means stuff to me. I like people's personalities. I like, even if it's like a dumb, what's her name? Kesha?
Yes.
Even if it's like a Kesha, like what? There's no philosophical content in a Kesha song, right? No, but there is. And her personality is interesting. It's interesting to see how consciousness manifests in all these different people. So I like listening to anything for a bit.
I wouldn't have guessed that. 2 more questions. Lions or monkeys?
Well, this is a really good question because there's so many different kinds of monkeys. So you're going to have to tell me what kind of monkey you're talking about. If it's a langur monkey, I'll take it. But if it's like one of those little rhesus monkeys, this is the last guy that I want around. Those guys are like thieves. Those guys are thieves and brawlers and gangsters. But langur monkeys, those Hanuman-looking monkeys, they're really noble and wonderful people. Lions, wow. Awesome. But again, it's like, do you really want a lion around? Not really.
No, definitely not. Last question, biking or walking?
Definitely biking.
Biking.
Walking is too slow. I do a lot of biking because I don't drive. So I just bike back and forth to like a train station or something.
I think I saw a video of you recording a bike trip of yours once.
Yeah. I want to do more of those. Those are like interesting.
That was awesome. I love that.
Actually, I do a lot of walking too. That's why I like Japan, because it makes you do a lot of walking and biking.
I see.
But walking gets like painful, doesn't it? It's painful on
Yes.
the joints and stuff. Biking is like you just move your legs in this pattern, and it's fun. You get wind in your face. I love biking.
Me too. Me
How
too.
about
Thank you
you?
so
Let me ask
Me,
you:
yes.
biking or walking?
Definitely biking.
Monkeys or tigers?
Tigers for sure.
What are you reading?
A lot of your stuff.
Well, sugary item most recently consumed.
Chocolate about 2 hours ago.
Nice. What was another? Oh, around the house.
Yes.
Interesting thing around the house.
Interesting around the house, when the guys come downstairs to make their music, and then when they get something right, the victory dance that they do, just all the screaming and shouting, like, yes, that part is just does something to me. I love that.
Awesome.
So yeah. Yeah.
All right, Parisa. This is great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. See you soon.
See you next week.
Yes.
Or more. No, I'll see you soon, right? Sooner than that.
Sooner than that, yes.
Okay.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.